Hey everyone, John here, and I'm pretty sure every single one of us has hyperfixated on one game that we just can't have, and can never have because that game was cancelled. There may be screenshots lurking out there, maybe some footage, maybe one sneaky person has a build they're not sharing, but every now and then, these cancelled games squeeze through the gaps and become playable to everyone. So this PSP right here may look all normal and basic, but then we turn it on, and that's flippin' Oblivion on the PSP. What's that doing there? Oblivion never came to the PSP. Well, let's talk about this a little bit more.
This video is sponsored by HelloFresh. Every week I dread planning my meals, choosing what to eat, heading to the store, buying more than I actually need, and then when it comes time to cook, I end up blankly staring into my fridge with no idea what to throw together. That's why when that HelloFresh box arrives on my doorstep, I couldn't be more relieved. With over 45 recipes to choose from, I never have to question what I'm going to make, and I'm not overstocking my fridge in the process. HelloFresh's quick and easy meals give me time back to spend with my family, to do things I enjoy, or to just not be stressed about what to make for our next meal. And if you've got a sweet tooth like I do, new subscriptions come with one free dessert item per box for life. I tried their chocolate lava cake, and it's amazing. So do me a favor. Click the link in the description or use my code GVG16FM and get 16 free meals plus free dessert for life while your subscription is active. Thanks again to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video, and let's jump right back into things.
This is Oblivion for the PSP, The Elder Scrolls Travels Oblivion to be exact, a sequel to the N-Gage hit The Elder Scrolls Travels Shadow Key. 5 builds exist, dated between 2006 and 2007 by Climax. This was eventually made public in 2016, and it's such a fascinating showcase. This was more another game set in Oblivion rather than Oblivion for the PSP. In fact, it seemed to be more of a linear level-based game, and what's here works extremely well. Climax did an incredible job of translating the base Oblivion movement to PSP. Menus, combat, traversal, it all feels just right. And while I'm sure the low-poly nature shows itself a bit in this footage all blown out like this, on an actual PSP screen, the game looks incredible. And you know, the PSP was known for many PlayStation 2 conversions, but seeing an Xbox 360 game on PSP is just kinda nuts. The game starts in a very similar way to the main Oblivion, where you're a prisoner in a dungeon that gets set free, and while the general beats are kinda similar, everything else is completely different. Different level design, different forms of progression. In fact, this game is far more combat focused. You get a sword way earlier, you're slashing at people immediately, there are swarms coming after you. This is of course a single-stick first-person game given the PSP didn't have dual sticks, and that for the most part isn't a problem. It does make aiming magic spells a little bit tricky, but I found the hardest thing honestly was just searching bodies, because you're holding down a shoulder button to look freely, but you can't move while doing that, so it's just kinda tricky to get the right position. But just moment-to-moment movement works. There's also a town level, and while there are some NPCs, you can definitely tell this is more of a level-based game. It's more about getting through the town, taking down swarms. There are some open nature elements to it, like having to search the right corpses to find the right elements, but you're not freely going around a world and exploring proper towns. And that's fine for this. I think this would have made a really good portable game, and Climax did a stellar job with what is here, and it's a huge shame that this never saw the light of day. In 2021, Forest of Illusion shared the December 2000 build of Dinosaur Planet. This was an infamous N64 game that eventually became Star Fox Adventures on the GameCube, and it's fascinating to see just how much of that game was not changed at all. While there are some differences, many scenes and level layouts play out near one-to-one. And what's also crazy is most of us assumed that the game became Star Fox Adventures on the GameCube. However, this build right here had already changed the male character Saber into Fox from Star Fox. Even voice lines were already recorded for this build on the N64. So while this is called Dinosaur Planet, this build was the transitional period between Dinosaur Planet and Star Fox Adventures. That happened on the N64, not the GameCube. The giant here even says you're going to Saber's adventure, but in fact you're going to Fox's. He's a liar. While there are some expected bugs, pretty much the full game is here, and it's glorious. This has to be hands down one of, if not the best looking N64 game out there. It's so varied and polished, and I love this low poly version of Star Fox Adventures. The Sega Saturn is an awesome console, but you can't really have a Sega system without a premier Sonic game, and unfortunately, I guess the Saturn had Sonic R, but otherwise, not so much. Throughout the entire lifespan of this system, it was all about Sonic x-treme, the big Sonic game that was going to save the Sega Saturn. We had many previews of it, seeing it in magazines, getting glimpses of footage, but the game would never actually surface in any official capacity. However, over the years, 3 builds have leaked. This one right here is Sonic x-treme version 40, and it's very basic. There's no sound, the frame rate is very low, and for some reason Sonic can jump infinitely. It's definitely more of a test room than a full-fledged game, but it's still really cool to see Sonic x-treme in any capacity. And that makes these other 2 far more interesting. This is the July 14th, 1996 build, and this is far more of a game. The frame rate is way better, Sonic feels great to control, enemies are here with collision, you can pick up rings. This truly feels like an alternate timeline game. Although interestingly there's no fisheye lens in this build, which was quite a big feature of Sonic x-treme. There's not really a whole lot to do in this area, but it just kind of gives you the general feeling of how Sonic x-treme would have felt. This is how it would have controlled, how it would have looked, and all in all, it's great. And this is the final available build, dated 4 days later on July 18th, 1996, and it uses an entirely different engine. Yeah, there's 4 days between these two. And this is a fairly basic grassy plain. There's some water to run through and you get different effects whether you're running through grass or running through water. There's a splash here. That's kinda cool. There's a diamond that shoots you into the air, but only this one. The other ones don't do that. They're banished diamonds. Sonic's got the spin dash, which you can rev up, and if you jump while you're revving, you go really, really high in the air. I like that. I kinda wish that was in an actual game. But there's less to do in this build than the previous one. There's no enemies, no level design really, but it shows you where the game was going, maybe into a more open and more 3D aesthetic, even though the sprites were generally still 2D. From 2006 until 2008, Free Radical, the developers of Time Splitters, were taking on Star Wars Battlefront 3. And in 2016, someone on 4chan shared an Xbox 360 build of the game. This was of course cancelled, but the work they were doing was pretty substantial. Part of the campaign is completely playable, with an opening cutscene and working missions, and the general gameplay is very close to the originals while also evolving quite drastically. So the big gimmick of Star Wars Battlefront 3 was not only could you battle in the sky and on the ground, but you could battle from the ground to the sky, and to the sky to the ground, seamlessly. You can just hop in a ship and go to space and battle there. It's crazy. This is definitely an unfinished product, but there's a bunch of different multiplayer maps to play on. Weapons feel good, the vehicle variety is great, and the dodge roll is here, which the DICE games didn't have. I love the dodge roll. Interestingly, parts of Battlefront 3 were salvaged into Battlefront Elite Squadron for the PSP. For instance, the characters right here in the story mode are the characters from the PSP game, so the story at least was told in some capacity, but that doesn't mean that Elite Squadron is Battlefront 3. These are very different games in control, in general tone, and what they're aiming to do, and it's really a shame this never saw the light of day because what's here plays great. Now here is a very infamous one. Following Resident Evil 1, Capcom got straight to work making Resident Evil 2, and they got very far into development. Around 80% of the game was completely finished, but then Capcom realized that this game was not a big enough jump from Resident Evil 1, and opted to make the entire game again, leaving this build dubbed Resident Evil 1.5. But of course, coverage of this build existed. We saw screenshots and footage, and so when Resident Evil 2 released, we were like, who's that? That's not Elza Walker, that's Claire Redfield. The original Resident Evil 2 was a completely different game. It may have had some of the same story beats, like introducing Leon and going through a zombie-infested police station, but everything else was different. Different level design, different tone, different scope. Resident Evil 1.5 and 2 are by no means the same game, they share so little in common. But then, in 2011, a 40% complete build of 1.5 found its way online, and it was disjointed and buggy, some rooms didn't connect and some progression couldn't be made, but ever since that release, modders have been hard at work making a cohesive 1.5 with all these assets, stringing these rooms together, building new areas, just trying to finish the game. Now, there is an official build out there that's more complete, it may even be the most up-to-date build that Capcom had, and while that person posted evidence that they have the build, they did not share it online, which led to a very large backlash, and them eventually just hiding from society. So a far more complete build does exist out there, but that person is not sharing it with us. It's our baby boy, the Sega Dreamcast, and this system was set to get a very ambitious game in 2001, the year the system was discontinued, and that was Half-Life. What we're looking at here is a completely finished build of Half-Life. In fact, magazines reviewed the game, but 2 weeks before the game was meant to release, it was cancelled. This was claimed to be because of changing market conditions, which of course meant the Dreamcast, but an entirely finished game was shelved, never to be played until 2 years later, where in 2003 it was leaked online. It's a very interesting version of the game because we would essentially get this build on the PS2 a few years later. That version had some unique stuff and was more polished, but playing it on the Dreamcast is surreal. Of course, the Dreamcast controller doesn't have dual analogs, so you use the face buttons to move and the analog stick to kind of aim around, and it works well enough-ish. It also contains the PC expansion Blue Shift, which PlayStation 2 didn't have. PS2 had a completely unique campaign which no other version of the game ever had, but it does make the Dreamcast version a bit more distinct as a console port of the game. And it also has a lot more load screens. PS2 doesn't have that. There's a load screen between getting off the train and getting into the building. That's like a few meters. They're everywhere. Rare's game Cameo is fascinating. It began life on the GameCube, and there's plenty of footage of that version, but it eventually became an Xbox 360 launch title. Well, between that standard definition GameCube version and then the HD remake on 360 was another version, the original Xbox build of Cameo. This build is dated 2004 and was made online in 2012. And yeah, this is essentially that lost GameCube version. It's quite similar to Dinosaur Planet and Star Fox Adventures. The general beats are fairly similar, but you will find quite a few differences in there. But of course the big thing being going from one console to another. But yeah, I've always felt that Cameo is one of the more underrated Rare games, and it's just kinda cool seeing it in different states. The GameCube state, the playable Xbox state, and of course the playable Xbox 360 state. Now, how about a cancelled game that was shared officially? This is Golden Axe. As part of Sega's 60th anniversary, they temporarily shared the game for free on Steam. And this sparked a bit of controversy from the original developers of the game. It was of course not meant to be called Golden Axe, that's just a play on words of the game being cancelled, and this game was built on heavy crunch conditions with a lot of mismanagement and just miscommunication. And those who actually worked on the game weren't being told it was being distributed, and it brought up many bad memories of the whole development of this game. And what's actually here isn't that bad, but you can tell it wasn't given the time it needed to actually grow. So while the release of this could have definitely been handled better, it's still very cool seeing a publisher release unfinished games in this manner. I wish more of them did it. Oh, hold the phone, there's another one! This is Saints Row Undercover, dated 2009. And in 2016, Volition, the developers of the game, released this themselves. This was a PSP game in a similar vein to GTA Vice City Stories and Liberty City Stories, and by that I mean basically taking the console premise and formula and shoving it on a handheld. And for an early build, this was pretty ambitious. There's a distinction between the open zone and more linear mission-based levels, and those linear ones work really well, just going around shooting people and whacking them. It's very responsive and plays like you expect Saints Row to play like, but the open world may not have been ready in this build. It's just very slow and sluggish, it runs poorly, the vehicles don't feel great to control, but it's still ambitious what they had going on here. Regardless of how early these builds may be, I wish more developers would share this stuff. It's fascinating to see, and I think allows more gamers to actually understand how games are made and appreciate what they have more. In 1999, Glover 2 was to be a thing, and builds of this game have shown themselves all over the years. We had one in 2011, and a very recent one in 2022. Glover 2 was to be a lot more ambitious than the first game, with this big sprawling hub world, and this chicken who I hate. Like, this chicken was in Glover 1, but they're far more prominent in Glover 2, and listen to how they talk. Don't like this. He's all over the Stop! Cease this, chicken! Glover can fully utilize his hand abilities this time. In the first game, it was basically hand form and ball form, but now, Glover can pick up a shovel. Glover can pick up an onion. The possibilities are endless. It was all in all shaping up to be a bigger and better game than the first, but no fault of Glover 2, the project was closed along with a bunch of other stuff thanks to the studio. Sorry, Glover. In 2022, something I never thought would happen occurred. The 2005 build of Rayman 4 showed itself by Phoenix Studio. If you're a big Rayman fan like myself, you probably watched this trailer over and over again. This was the original Rayman Raving Rabbids, a platformer, Rayman 4. In fact, other versions of the game, being on DS and GBA, did not get the memo, and they stayed as Rayman 4, a platformer. But the actual Rayman Raving Rabbids was a mini-game collection. But lots of stuff we're seeing in this trailer is fully playable in this leaked build. You can ride on spiders that climb walls, ride on birds that fly through the sky. In fact, Rayman 4 seemed way more ambitious than I ever expected, with these humongous environments and a very agile moveset. Rayman's extremely quick in this game. In fact, he's got moves here that Sonic would pick up later in like Sonic Unleashed. Things like the Stomp are here and the Air Dive are here. Not to say that Sonic stole them from Rayman, given this game was cancelled and Sonic Team wouldn't have seen it, but the fact that they're here in 2005 is bonkers. Combat's really agile too, with these multi-hit combos where you just keep pummeling on rabbits, just keep punching them, just keep getting them. You can change between different costumes, which don't really seem to do a whole lot, but there's also this hook move where you can latch onto people during combat or use it for puzzle solving. In fact, the rabbits in Rayman 4 were less quirky and more intimidating invaders, and there's scenes almost like the scarabs in Halo 3 where you have to sort of infiltrate their facilities, find the self-destruct switch and get out of their big robot things immediately before it blows up. It's nuts, and I wish we could have seen what this game could have become on console. But Rayman 4 would never see the light of day, but the variety on offer here is out of this world. One of the coolest leaked builds I think we've ever seen. And to end off is GoldenEye for Xbox 360. This build is dated 2007 and leaked in 2021, and it is the full game. So what's the big deal, huh? Like, didn't GoldenEye release last year on Switch and Xbox? Like, don't we have GoldenEye modern systems? Yes, but those are the N64 versions. Even the Xbox version is the N64 version. This is something done from scratch. GoldenEye 360 is basically the Halo Anniversary version of GoldenEye. There's a graphical toggle on RB. When you press that, you go between the older version and the newer version. So not only do you get a really fresh looking GoldenEye, but it runs far better too. It's a full-on native remaster of the game, with better visuals, better performance, better controls, more options, better multiplayer even. Those maps also have the graphical facelift, and not only is there split screen, but also LAN play. I would have hoped the final release would have had full-on online with actual matchmaking as well, but what's here is incredible. This is basically the perfect remaster of GoldenEye, and it's something that was never officially released, likely due to licensing. It's also very funny what they put in to replace the Nintendo logo. Now that should have been in the final version. It's just fascinating, essentially playing brand new games in franchises that we love. There's a Sonic out there, and a Rayman out there, and a Battlefront 3 out there, and so many more. And while many of these are in early states and aren't 100% playable, just getting a peek behind the curtain is valuable too. It's very rare we get a behind-the-scenes look at how development works with any of these games, so early builds are just as valuable as completely finished ones. Anyway, was there a game in this video you weren't aware of, and what do you think about all the stuff we've shown? And is there a game that we didn't talk about, that you've played, that never released, and was cancelled, but you played it? Let us know! Thanks everybody! And because you have watched all the way until the end of the video, it's hot take time. This one here. Link's crossbow training. Good game. I know it's just sort of seen as the pack-in for the Wii Zapper, But I think this is one of the premier rail shooters on the Wii. It's not just a gimmicky reuse of Twilight Princess assets. This is a banger of a game. Whether it's just the on-rail sections, or the exploring sections, or the bits where you're sort of stuck to the ground, you're rotating around. There's so many cool different ways to play Link's crossbow training. And I think it's one of the most clever reuses of game assets, because it just takes maps and models from the main game but puts them in a different context. I want more of this. I want, like, Mario Odyssey crossbow training. Anyway, thank you for watching until the end, and I will catch you next time. Bye, everyone.